Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, our weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, in the line of fire. The biggest US defense deal in history, Saudi Arabia to spend $60 billion on warplanes, and there's more to come. Also, is China still manipulating its currency, giving it an unfair advantage in exports? The United States lets fly and investigates. And an anniversary not to forget, 2 years since Lehman's collapse. Are we any closer to avoiding the next financial crisis? There is one thing you can almost guarantee in global trade. It doesn't matter what the economic climate is. Countries will spend money, and lots of it, on weapons. It's in some ways a sad fact that weapons are always in demand, but the argument of defence, it's always a good one to increase one's military arsenal. And so we have the US and Saudi Arabia working towards what could be the biggest American arms deal ever. At this stage, it's warplanes, but talks are underway to sell even more weapons to help Saudi beef up its naval and missile defence systems. Here are the numbers. The total package worth as much as $60 billion. Just so that makes some sense, worldwide arms sales last year were almost $60 billion too. What does that money get you? Well, 84 new F-15 fighters and 70 more are going to be upgraded as well. 70 Apache helicopters in the deal as well, along with another 72 Black Hawk helicopters, 36 Little Bird helicopters they're called, and that's just all in the sky. Navy upgrades too. That could net US defence companies another $30 billion, according to the Wall Street Journal. Now, this all needs congressional approval, but something that keeps 75,000 people in jobs in the US isn't likely to meet any disapproval, and if it did, it would probably be Europe that stood to benefit in the end. We're going to talk through all of this now with John Lake. He's joining us from Oxford in the UK from Arabian Aerospace magazine. John, great to have you with us. Let's just talk through that headline number first. The 60 billion or so, which it looks like this deal is going to be worth. I mean, it's a huge number. My very simple question, though, is why does Saudi Arabia need that much hardware?
Well, the Americans are looking hard at disengaging to an extent from the region, and they're looking far more at burden sharing. And so this should be seen very much in the same context as what we were hearing about at the Farnborough Air Show with Kuwait looking at strengthening its offensive capabilities. It's all about countries in the region taking over more of the burden for their own defence.
Okay, they've gone for, as I'm looking here, they've gone for a lot of the F-15 fighter jets, which, as I understand it, it's kind of an oldish plane. I guess has it been sufficiently updated over the time for still be demand for it?
It has been updated over time, and they're getting a particularly modern version of it, and it's the bomber version of the aeroplane. Saudi Arabia's air defence will be very much in the hands of the Eurofighter Typhoons that they're procuring. This is very much about strengthening Typhoon's long-range offensive bomber capabilities, augmenting the Tornadoes that they have and augmenting the fleet of some 70 bomber F-15s that they already have. It's basically about adding another 4 squadrons or so of bomber F-15s to their frontline force.
Okay, then let's look at the flip side here, because we've been talking almost exclusively about what's good for Saudi Arabia here. What's good for the United States, obviously, is that this is jobs. It's going to keep a lot of people employed. It's a lot of money. It's a timely boost for the US economy.
Oh, absolutely. It's absolutely crucial, certainly for Boeing's St. Louis plant, where the F-15 line would otherwise be looking at closing really very soon. This keeps it open beyond the aircraft that they're building for Korea and for Singapore. And gives them some breathing space. Even the Super Hornet that they build at St. Louis hasn't got that much longer. So it's absolutely crucial for Boeing, and particularly for their St. Louis operation, keeping that open until the next generation of fighter for the US Navy comes through, or the next generation trainer for the US forces.
So what sort of time frame then, John,
it's pretty critical for...
Sorry to interrupt you there. What sort of time frame are we looking at, though? Because you know, you might look at it and think it's just one deal. It is a very big deal, of course, but still, it is just the one deal with one country. Is this going to be a blip in employment for Boeing and the like, or is this employment which can be sustained?
Well, It is a blip, but it keeps the lines open at a critical time and gives the company more time to put in place programs that will replace the F-15 and the Super Hornet. So it's, yeah, it doesn't take that long to build 84 F-15Es. We don't know what production rate they're going to be looking at, but it's likely to be somewhere between 12 and 18 per year. So it's not going to last that long in the general scheme of things, but it gives them that half decade of work, you know, and allows them to fill what would otherwise be a gap and that would otherwise threaten the future of an absolutely vital plant, not only for Boeing, but for the interests of the US defence industry more generally.
All right, John, let's just pause here for a moment because I want to dig a little deeper, break down the numbers further for our viewers. Remember the headline number we mentioned before, $60 billion, which was also the same number for global arms sales in 2009, $57.5 billion to be exact. Was actually a drop-off on 2008, but in recession times, I guess that's understandable. Here it is, the United States out on top, 39% of the share, deals worth $22.6 billion. Russia second, but by more than half, at $10.4 billion. And third, France with $7.4 billion of deals. Now, if you notice something here, those are all developed nations. Of course they are, they've got the money, right? But don't think for a moment that developing nations aren't spending. In fact, in some cases, you could argue they are spending more. The Business Standard of India says Russia and India will invest $6 billion each to develop a new fighter jet. 250 of them will be made at a cost of $100 million each. Do the math, that's $25 billion over and above the development costs. The word is this jet will be more powerful than the US Air Force's much vaunted F-22 Raptor, which isn't even on sale yet. Each of those costs $340 million. That price tag's led the Pentagon to order just 187 of them, half of the number it planned to buy in 2006. John Lake from Arabian Aerospace still with us. John, this deal, Russia and India, they are, as I pointed out, more emerging, developing economies. Is it the start of a change? Not perhaps a new world order in air defence or anything, but a swing away nonetheless.
No, very much not. It is a lifeline for that particular Russian project, but aerospace cooperation and Indian procurement of Russian military hardware, particularly aircraft, is absolutely nothing new. It does reflect India's desire to increase and add depth and breadth to its own aerospace industry, but that would be easy to overstate because the Indians are sharp operators and they've been doing great things industrially in terms of licensed production of aeroplanes, of integrating their own weapons, sensors and avionics systems onto other people's platforms for a while. It's not the kind of quantum leap that Russian propagandists might have you believe.
Tell you what is a quantum leap, though, at least what they're saying. They're going to build a fighter jet to rival the Americans' F-22 Raptor, which is so big and bad it isn't even on sale yet, and they reckon they can do it at a third of the price. Is that, as they say, pie in the sky rather than a real breakthrough jet?
That is absolutely pie in the sky. Completely. The Russians have always talked a very good game. And to be fair, the Russians will produce something that from an aerodynamic point of view and a performance point of view, it will be staggeringly good at air shows. There's no doubt that it will be able to fly into corners of the envelope that would leave Western designers extremely envious. But when it comes to integrating the really advanced kit, to having the kind of low probability of intercept radar, all of the advanced systems, and producing an aircraft with the same kind of combat capabilities, to say nothing for the moment about stealth, which has taken the Americans generations to get to the point that they're at with the F-22. Yeah, that's pie in the sky. That's not going to happen.
All right, then, John Lake there, great talking to you. Thank you for your time. Now, currencies in the spotlight this week, particularly in Asia. The US Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner really took aim at China's trade and currency policies, saying the US will actually use a G20 summit in Seoul in November to rally other world powers against Beijing. They want the Chinese currency, the yuan, to be allowed to strengthen faster after claiming for so long China's keeping it artificially low. Great for the exporters, tough for the US, which has to compete with such cheap exports. This is what Geithner, using some of the toughest language we've heard so far, told a Senate committee in Washington.
It is the judgment of the IMF that in view of the very limited movement in the Chinese currency, the rapid pace of productivity and income growth in China relative to its trading partners, the size of its current account surplus, and the substantial level of ongoing intervention in exchange markets, that the Chinese currency is significantly undervalued. We share that assessment, and we are concerned, as are many of China's trading partners, that the pace of appreciation has been too slow and the extent of appreciation too limited.
Meanwhile, Japan has intervened in its currency, the yen, which, as we told you last week, up at a 15-year high. Opposite problem to China. Here, exports are taking a hammering. The move came after Prime Minister Naoto Kan managed to fend off a challenge to his leadership. Analysts, though, not convinced this intervention will succeed. This is why, so far, this indebted nation has spent about $20 billion in the market. Last time it did it, 2004, it sold around $177 billion worth of yen in just 3 months. A year before that, $245 billion. So right now we're talking drop in the ocean stuff. And Japan, lacking in support from other countries, is almost certainly going to have to intervene again. When counting the cost returns, Lehman Brothers, 2 years ago, its failure was the centre of the financial universe. Coming up, the lessons and the legacy. And in fact, is this part of that legacy? The millions of Americans out of jobs and officially living below the poverty line. The extraordinary numbers and the stories in just a moment. Back to Counting the Cost, your weekly business stop right here on Al Jazeera. Let's look at US domestic matters. You know, we call the show Counting the Cost because we want to see the cost of this economic slowdown on people, on their jobs, on their lives. There is a specific number which we can count this week, 14.3%. That is the number of people in the United States living below the poverty line, the minimum level of income deemed enough to live an adequate life. Just so you know, these are those minimum incomes. For a family of 4, just under $22,000. For a single person under 65 years of age, around $11,000. And over 65, it's more than $10,000. But those are the numbers. What about the people behind them? Rob Reynolds has their story from California.
Luis Garcia lost his truck driving job a year ago. Now he struggles to raise 4 children in a cramped apartment in El Centro, California.
I lost my house now. I don't have nothing. And when you come to live in an apartment like this, you know, 1 bedroom, and with 4 kids, that's hard, real hard.
Garcia applies for 3 or 4 jobs a week, but he's had no luck. It's frustrating.
I'm a strong guy. I can work hard in anything. I have experience in a lot of jobs, but I can't find a job in here.
There are many people like Garcia in El Centro. The town and its surrounding Imperial County is the epicenter of unemployment in America. The region near the U.S.-Mexico border has chronically high joblessness, linked to its mostly agricultural economy. There's little manufacturing or service industry, and most farms are now highly mechanized. Imperial was also hit hard by the subprime mortgage collapse. Many nearly new houses now sit abandoned in the broiling sun. More than 1 in 4 people here live below the poverty line. Community activist Vivian Perez says she's never seen it so bad.
There's no jobs. Businesses have closed down. There's just no jobs. I mean, the individuals of Imperial County are not lazy. They're hardworking individuals. There's just no work.
This is the unemployment office in El Centro, where people come to search for jobs. El Centro has the highest unemployment rate in the United States at more than 30%. And that's more than 3 times the national average. On one recent morning, a single opening for a prison guard's job was posted, and more than 300 people showed up to apply. Justin Kazaya was one of them. He's been out of work since April.
It's really tough. For instance, I had a good job and then I lost it. So then I go and I apply for a job at the mall. I can't even get a job at the mall. Or fast food even. It's really tough.
At a job training center, students learn basic computer skills in hopes of landing a clerical job.
Okay, that's your main menu, right? Okay.
Higher education opportunities here are scarce. There is one community college, but state spending cuts have reduced the number of spaces available for students. The local and federal governments are already the biggest employers in El Centro, but activists say Washington needs to do more.
You see Obama in the news and he cares about the underserved community. He needs to come and look here. This is bad.
Luis Garcia can't wait to get out of El Centro. As soon as his daughter Elizabeth graduates from high school next year, he's taking his family somewhere else, anywhere else.
I don't think it's not a lot of future in this town. It's terrible what's going on in this town.
Yeah, it is, and what's worrying is how long it's been going on for. Thousands of kilometers away from El Centro, California, is New York, the world's financial control room, where 2 years ago an investment bank called Lehman Brothers was left to founder, and everything went pear-shaped from there. Sama Al-Shahad is in our London Broadcast Centre looking back at the legacy of that failure.
Thanks. It's amazing to think that it was only 2 years ago when Lehman Brothers collapsed, sending the markets and our economies into freefall. It was the beginning of the financial crisis with repercussions that will last for many, many years to come. That's why today the Lehman legacy is still being felt. Now, let's look at some numbers here to get a real feel for this. This is where US financial stocks were 3 days before the bankruptcy announcement, at a respectable 12,000 points. Today, they've recovered, but still remain 900 points below where they used to be. So that's the market indicator, but what about the impact on us, on world economies? Again, let's look at world growth before and after Lehman's collapse to gauge where we are. Just before the crisis in 2007, the US was growing at 2%, Japan slightly higher, and the EU was growing at just over 3%. Fast forward to 2009, a year after the collapse, the picture changes completely. All of those economies were in recession, with Japan's real GDP witnessing the steepest drop. Today, as we all know, the financial crisis has turned into an economic one, with current fears that even the anemic growth that some countries have been showing might nosedive, taking us into a double-dip recession. Joining me to discuss the legacy of Lehman's is Tim Congdon, Fellow of the Institute of Economic Affairs here in London. Tim, thank you so much for coming in. I mean, it's quite amazing to think that 2 years ago, when Lehman Brothers collapsed, there was a thought that this was the end of investment banking. But if you look right now, you see that investment banking is back on top. Investment bankers are truly the winners of this crisis, and it's ordinary people who have lost out. How did this happen?
Well, companies and governments are always going to want to issue securities. So there are always going to be people organizing the issues of those securities. So there'll always be a need for those banking services, investment banking services. And it's true that they survive, but let's just be clear that some investment banks have disappeared. So in that sense, they haven't really been the winners from the crisis at all.
But if you look at Goldman Sachs, you look at the sort of the big giants, they're reaping in the money.
Sure, partly because there's less competition, because Lehman Brothers, because Bear Stearns, because Merrill Lynch, Lehman, Bear Stearns have disappeared, Merrill Lynch not quite what it was, so there's less competition and they make more money.
It's a very good point you make. So do you think that in regulation terms we've done enough to prevent, to avert another crisis?
We had 15 years from the early 1990s until 2007 with the previous Basel capital regime. That regime is now alleged to have been inadequate, too light, not restrictive enough, and so on. Those 15 years were the most stable that the world economy has ever enjoyed. The problem, I'm afraid, was not really anything with the capital regime. It was the way the regulators failed to monitor the system up to the end, and they're now tightening it in a way which, in my opinion, is going to do a lot of harm. Part of the harm was in the 2 years from late 2008. They tightened up too much too quickly.
Currently now, with the Basel rules coming in and banks being asked to have more money in their coffers to act as a buffer in effect, are you happy with those rules right now that have just been agreed?
I think these rules are a mistake. The whole philosophy is a mistake. The critical thing in September, October 2008 was action to increase the quantity of money immediately, not in March 2009. They could have done quantitative easing immediately in autumn 2008 and bring in the capital rules slowly. Don't hurry them. Bring them in slowly.
Well, I mean, Basel right now are not hurrying them. I mean, it
Sure.
seems shocking to some people.
Can I just say
the
fact that they're doing it slowly tells you that they recognise they made a terrible mistake.
Well, did they recognise they made a terrible mistake, or isn't it the lobbying power of the banks?
If they think these things are such a good idea, why not bring them in 6 months, yeah?
Well, the lobbying power of the banks is quite powerful. We've seen that.
We've seen that, particularly in this crisis. Let's just be clear about this. I've said, if these are such a wonderful thing, why not bring them in 6 months? And that's what they did in September, October 2008, and what happened was a catastrophe, yeah?
OK, but let me ask you another question. There are many people that would say that the way our economies were growing is that they were preferring the banking sector. In many ways, it's become too bloated. And for many ordinary people, those in the non-financial sector, their real incomes had been declining since the late 70s. And no wonder they needed to rely on credit to be able to live. So that surely...
With respect, the 15 years to 2007 saw the most dramatic rise in living standards across the globe that we've ever seen.
But a rise, as we've seen now, that has been based on credit.
Look, I'm afraid the Earth doesn't receive any gifts from Mars. It's only the people on Earth who can produce things that they enjoy. The world can't borrow from itself. This idea that our living standards depend on credit is obviously nonsense.
Well, hold on. Let's agree that real incomes have been declining for ordinary people.
No, they weren't. Nonsense.
And they have been increasing.
Nonsense. Clearly, the growth in world output in the world economy from the early 1990s until 2007 was the most spectacular that the world has ever enjoyed. Living standards depend upon output. Output is growing rapidly. Living standards are growing rapidly.
OK, then if that is the case, then why did we have such a disastrous crash? Why is it the ordinary folk that are suffering and not the bankers?
In my view, it's very clear what the cause of this was. It was the too sudden change in banks' capital rules in September, October 2008. Maybe the banks were taking too large risks. OK, then they must move to a different capital arrangement over a period of time. OK. And in the interim, don't do such things that cause banks to slash credit lines, reduce the quantity of money, and so on. That was the mistake that was made in 2008. That wasn't the banks. That was the governments, regulators, and central banks made that mistake.
Timothy Compton, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And that is about it for this week. If you've got a comment on the show, just want to get in touch, best way to do it's on Twitter. Here's the page, @AJ Counting Costs, the name to look for. I update that with interesting tidbits from the business world, also updates on what's happening on this show, so please feel free, get in touch whenever you want. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.